Welcome to EDCO's Resource Check-In Podcast, updating the Central Oregon community with info into different resources that are available during this crisis. We realize there is no one-size-fits-all solution for your business, but we hope you walk away with some helpful tips. Please welcome today's guests, Jon Stark, Redmond Economic Development Senior Director, and Damon Runberg, Regional Economist at the State of Oregon Employment Department. So let's dive into the discussion today, gentlemen. So I'd like to throw this to Damon for you first. Can you explain what pandemic unemployment assistance is and who is eligible?
Yes, the PUA, as it's often called these days, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. You know, with the CARES Act, there was a lot of lingo going out these days, a lot of acronyms, and it's sort of an alphabet soup of programs. So it's pretty easy to get confused about what's out there, what's available. But this one is when people have been talking about the expansion of unemployment insurance and assistance to those individuals who are self-employed, sole proprietors, 1099 workers, et cetera. That's what the PUA program is. So traditionally, unemployment insurance is really for those covered workers who actually pay into the unemployment insurance system, just like you'd pay any insurance. You know, you pay your premiums each month, and then if something bad happens and you get in a car accident or whatever, then you have coverage for that. Well, unemployment insurance is very similar, where there's a payroll tax that comes out. It covers those workers in the case of a period of unemployment. And so sole proprietors and self-employed individuals don't traditionally have that coverage, though. So the federal government expanded that through the PUA program to include these individuals for a period of time.
And just a quick question and follow up on that. Current timeline to be aware of, what does that have to do? You know, what are we looking at long-term from that timeline?
Yeah, it's actually a pretty long timeline that these individuals will have coverage, which is pretty fantastic. So it actually is backdated to February 2nd, which is long before the pandemic really started. So most individuals are not going to really file claims until likely the week of March, after March 12th. And then it actually continues through most of 2020 that it will be available for these self-employed individuals. And also, actually some really great news too is the extra $600 a week that through the CARES Act that unemployed people are getting right now through the middle of July also extends to those people on the PUA. So for the next few months at least, these self-employed people will get a pretty healthy boost to their income through this assistance.
Damon, just curious, we've been working with a lot of our traded sector employers related to business owners. And, we've got companies that, may have 4 or 5 employees. Either a portion of their business was closed or the entire business was closed. Does a business owner count under the PUA as well?
Yeah, great question. So it's funny because oftentimes people hear this program and they assume it's for just your mom and pop operations where they have no employees and it's it's just a sole proprietor situation. But yeah, there's no reason why a business owner who has payroll employees can't also apply for the PUA program. So, your workers could be covered under unemployment insurance, and you can get covered under the PUA as the business owner. And by the way, these businesses can also apply for the PPP program that allows for some assistance to keep workers on their payroll as well. So, businesses today can really hodgepodge together a variety of these programs to help them through this tough time.
We've also been hearing, Damon, that the Employment and Unemployment Office, that section or division of WorkSource, has been catching up, processing a lot more claims than in the beginning. And so I think you've added some resources, right, to help maximize staff and process more than are coming in these days?
Yeah, I mean, there was a definite backlog early on. The first 3 weeks, just the volume of claims coming through was something the agency had never seen before. They were staffed to take claims for the middle of the longest expansion in U.S. history. So, there were only 100 claims takers when this pandemic began, totally caught off guard when the volume of claims came in. So, in about a 4-week period of time, they ramped up from 100 employees taking claims to over 600 workers taking claims. Expanded hours, expanded resources. So they've done all sorts of stuff to help try to alleviate the backlog. So a backlog still exists today, but the good news is they're processing significantly more claims each week than are coming in, which means they're eating into that backlog pretty nicely as far as the workload. today, I just looked earlier. It looks like maybe somewhere around 50,000 claims are yet to be processed that are out there. So there still is a backlog, and so really ask for patience for those people waiting for their claim to be processed. But it is getting quite a bit quicker right now than what it was those first few weeks.
Hey, Jon, I got a quick question for you. We're talking about looking forward to the time that businesses are going to open. Can you give some thoughts on what the plan might look like for those businesses?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are underway right now, and that is a result of the economic recovery team that's been led by Annette Liba. It has the chambers and SBDC, EDCO, and others that serve local businesses. And there's been a draft of protocols that have been put forth to the governor's office, and that draft is being finalized now, and we expect some of that to be turned around back available to the public. Uniquely, Oregon State University is going to be hosting some innovation summits next week by industry, and they're going to be recording those and then getting them out to businesses that will talk about some of those protocols. The hygiene, the hand washing, the temperature checking, how to clean your facility, how to track potential people that have been sick, what the barometer or thermometer should read to allow people come into work. So there's more coming out every day on that, and I expect to see some things next week. But some of the things we've been hearing from some of our traded sector companies that really didn't have a protocol but implemented some things basically to keep their employees safe while they remained open, and that included temperature checks of employees and vendors that were coming on site. Some have implemented questionnaires to find out where these people have been, if they've been in contact, whether in their household or outside of it, with other people that have been sick. They're also going through a process internally. They've hired some people to wipe down surfaces. That's their job, is to follow folks around and wipe down surfaces, make sure there's a safe place for people to work. And then uniquely, and we certainly don't expect everybody to do this, some have actually replaced doorknobs with kick knobs. So basically you kick the bottom of the door and it opens for you. You don't even have to touch it. So some of our traded sector companies and their resiliency have really implemented some things before the protocols were out. So more to come on that, but those are some of the things we're hearing that are part of some of the new guidelines for reopening.
Jon, I've got a quick question as far as scaling. What does that look like? How can businesses scale during this time? So obviously we've got some issue of getting back up to operation. Could you give some tips on how to scale effectively as you're opening back up?
Yeah, Matt, that's a great question. And I'll first refer back to what you said early on. There is no one size fits all. Every business is unique. It has its own clientele, whether you're a restaurant or a retailer, or somebody in hospitality. But I think it's important that you don't overestimate reopening. So you don't know what your revenues are going to be. I think it's a good idea to establish a business plan for reopening, just like you would if you were starting a business, and make some estimates as to what you think your revenues would be. And then as you reopen, that you scale the expense side of that according to what your revenue projections are, but be prepared to take quick action if they either come in bigger than expected or less than expected. So I think it's about planning. We know that restaurants, for example, have a pretty large investment to get the food in-house to produce. I think the worst thing somebody could do is order too much inventory there or bring back too many employees and not have the revenue to support that. And, I think the lifeline here that the feds have given here is just that. But if you misjudge what the revenue numbers are going to be, it could be a failure. And we don't want to see that either. And also, I think it's going to be important to implement some of these safety guidelines and hygiene guidelines, because if there's a spike, we certainly don't want to see a second closure, because some of these businesses will be able to weather this first storm and this first closure, but perhaps not a second. So we are all in this together, and we've got to make good decisions, take care of our responsibility, but importantly, back to scaling, you really need to right size the expense side to what your revenue projections are. And there's a ton of folks out there to get assistance through. SBDC is a good example. They've got numerous business advisors. Your local EDCO or your local chamber, Opportunity Knox, and SCORE as well are some good resources to begin thinking about what that business plan might look like.
Yeah, and this is a question kind of trailing on that, John. And this is for both of you guys. Do you foresee it difficult to get those employees to come back to work as we're opening up during this time? Who wants to take that first?
Well, I mean, I've been hearing this one a lot, that there's been a lot of concern, primarily those who are on unemployment insurance today, with the sort of the more lucrative boost to unemployment through the $600 a week from the federal government, that there's some concern that these folks won't want to come back to work when business opens back up because they can make more money on unemployment insurance. And that's true in some instances. I mean, someone who's making about $12.50 an hour, with unemployment insurance and the boost to it from the federal government, we're looking at $23 an hour for some of those folks. So, they're making more money on unemployment, which was really the policy goal, was to make people whole when they created this unemployment program, was to make sure that when people are being asked to stay at home and not work or look for work, that you're not going to, foreclose on your house. You'll be able to make your payments. You'll be able to put food on the table, et cetera. And now that we're looking at reopening, or our focus is shifting towards reopening, this conversation about, well, how do we get people back on payrolls and off unemployment? It's a real question, and I think it's really a short-term concern. First, because mid-July is when we're going to see that extra $600 a week fall off as a benefit. So that's going to make unemployment insurance much less lucrative. And then second, if you're a business and you open up and you rehire your workers, they have to come back if they can't stay on unemployment insurance. If you're hiring them, they no longer qualify. The exception is, there's a few exceptions to the rule with COVID. One of which is if you can't find childcare because your daycare is closed or your kid's school is still closed, you would still qualify for unemployment insurance even if the business is back open. But for the most part, most individuals, if you provide protective equipment and have a plan for bringing them back on, they need to come back to work and they can't just keep staying on unemployment in perpetuity.
Yeah, just like in any other employment situation, it's going to be important for employers to document what they've been told if someone's not coming back, and then report that back to UI because of the reasons that Damon had mentioned. I would like to say one thing about childcare. So you're going to turn the switch on, and there's going to be instant demand for childcare. And we were already challenged on capacity before all this started. And there are some new policies for childcare operation as well, or some recommendations for distancing and numbers of children they're going to be able to have. And so your childcare seat may or may not be available. So you want to communicate early and often. And if you're having trouble, 211 has established the right protocols to help you find childcare. And they have available to them the network of childcare providers through Neighbor Impact, who has the childcare resources division there. And so they're a secondary resource, but 211 is the place to go for that.
Yeah, that's great, because we're definitely concerned about what it looks like when, folks are asked to come back to work and they've got kids at home and have no choice. They can't work remote. They've got to be in a traditional workplace, but you can't necessarily take your 3-year-old with you to the factory, right? So trying to figure out how we provide sufficient childcare for these workers is really critical. And like you said, it was already kind of a crisis in Central Oregon, and now it's only worse because it looks like, at least in the first phase of opening, daycares are going to be capped at, I think, somewhere around 10 kids.
Yeah. So speaking of people coming back to work, I guess I'll start with you, Damon. What is the employment? I mean, if you were to look at what you feel like the employment rate may be going into the future, what does it look like for us here in Deschutes County?
Yeah. So right now we're looking at, we know roughly of all the unemployment insurance claims that have been processed from Deschutes County residents, we're looking at 16 to 17% of the labor force right there. That doesn't include the people who are self-employed, the sole proprietors, et cetera. Across the state, we have around 260,000 of those folks. We think there might be 100,000 to file for the PUA program. So you add those onto the 16% we already have from the traditional unemployed, And then on top of that, there were people who were unemployed before COVID started, right? Historically low rates of unemployment, but they were still there. We had 3.5% unemployment. And then also one more thing to add to the puzzle. Right now, we're in the midst of our big seasonal hiring push. Traditionally, April and May into early June is when we see the strongest seasonal hiring. So we are going to not only have all these layoffs, but we're going to have the lack of hiring on the other end that we would typically expect this time of year. So put it all together, I'm not going to try to say an exact number, but it's going to be well over 20%, I think.
Wow. That's
certainly higher than what we had during the Great Recession by several digits. So unprecedented from at least our lifespan, right, Damon?
Yeah, we barely hit double digits in Deschutes County. We were one of the hardest hit counties in Oregon during the last recession. So, we were just over 10%. I think 11% is what we capped out at the high end for the Great Recession. So for a short period of time, we're definitely going to exceed those numbers by a significant margin.
And do you see, Damon, I said Deschutes County, but do you see that also for sort of the Tri-County region just looking essentially the same?
Not quite. I mean, Deschutes County is definitely going to be hit proportionally harder than either Crook or Jefferson. Crook is a little bit closer to Deschutes, but really the fact that there's so many leisure and hospitality jobs in Deschutes County, as well as healthcare jobs, these are the two industries that have really been hit the hardest. And so we're finding that these sort of tourism as well as health hubs across the state are feeling the brunt of the layoffs right now. So I would expect to see Deschutes County would have the highest rate of unemployment in the Tri-County area.
So that doesn't look like a very good outlook, Damon, but could you give a further outlook, maybe 2020 and beyond? What does that look like for us?
Yeah, I mean, the short term is definitely brutal. It doesn't leave much room for optimism in there. And I do, when you're looking at potentially 20% unemployment or higher, I mean, there's just not a lot of ways to sugarcoat that number. But I think when you consider the fact that the recession that we are now in was not caused by some sort of underlying economic weakness, and it was caused by a global pandemic, that if we remove the shock out of the system, if we address the pandemic, we get a virus, et cetera, not a virus, we get a vaccine. We don't want more viruses, but if we get a vaccine, then I think the long-term outlook is really positive for us. And really the goal between now and getting a vaccine is, how do we keep these businesses solvent? How do we keep them alive? Because when this is all gone, when we get rid of the pandemic, we want to make sure that we can just go back to business as usual. And so any assistance that can be provided businesses as consumers trying to figure out how to support these businesses as best we can. We just got to survive really the next 9 months and get to I think a finish line that looks pretty rosy for us here in Central Oregon, actually.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jon and Damon. I appreciate this very much.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Happy to be here, Matt. Thank you.